We've been waiting for Graeme Reynolds. Graeme, welcome. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for the invite to come along this morning too.
Oh, look, it is our absolute pleasure. We've all been very excited. Now, you served for 27 years in the Australian Defence Force, and you've done some amazing things. Can you just give us a bit of a highlight on some of the things that you've done?
Look, I've as a musician before becoming an officer, I've had a number of years with a number of bands Army bands in Australia, the Royal Military College Band in Canberra, and some of the regional bands in Kapooka, Adelaide, and Melbourne, and here in Newcastle. But certainly some of the highlights have been serving my country on operations in Bougainville and East Timor, and visits to Solomon Islands, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, New Zealand, and the UK on exchange. So, yeah, it's been very honoured.
You have done so many things, and one of those things included the ceremony of the keys at the Tower of London. That must have been just mind-blowing.
Well, some of your listeners may well have seen this ceremony. It happens every night, and it has happened every night since the mid-1700s, where the duty yeoman or the guard would lock up the crown jewels with the keys. So at that time, there would be a bugler accompanying those yeomans to play the last post at the evening in honour of those that didn't come back from the battlefield. So if your listeners have been to London and the Tower, they may well have seen that ceremony of the keys. And I had the honour of doing the last post there when I was doing guard duties at Buckingham Palace back in 2000.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, before we go in to talk about the traditional role of the bugler, one more thing I just wanted to make mention was that you've also had the privilege of playing a bugle that was found on the battlefield of Gallipoli that now lives at the Canberra War Museum.
That's correct. So number of years ago, a good friend of mine was organising what has been called Flowers of War, a whole series of concerts and events, including things like the Diggers Symphony and the Diggers Requiem, etc. So as part of that program, they discovered that the War Memorial Archive in Mitchell, if some of your listeners have been there, they would know that it's a massive, big warehouse full of aircraft and helicopters and tanks and all manner of different warfare equipment. And there's a small component there of musical instruments that were found or have featured in wartime years. And some of those relics were things like bugles, whistles, etc., that some of the commanders would have carried. So as part of that particular concert, I had to select about 15 bugles and select the best one that was in tune. And this particular bugle, it's on your website. The photos are there.
Certainly is, the morning show page at 2nurfm.com.au.
And you'll see me holding the bugle with surgical gloves, because the War Memorial staff wouldn't allow my sweat to get onto the brass because it is a relic. But it was found on the battlefield and played by one of the buglers as part of their role in the field. It must be
an amazing experience to do that. Let's go and talk about the traditional role of the bugler, because we know that they were sending signals, but we didn't really think a lot about it, and it must have been actually a terrifying role, because speaking off air, you were saying to me they weren't armed and you know, they were going to be taken out first because they're commanding the army.
Well, I guess in modern warfare, we see telecommunications and radios that send those messages around the battlefield, but back in hundreds of years ago, those messages would have been relayed by the bugler, who would have had to have memorised all of these bugle calls in a little book here I've got.
So that's the Rivali.
The stand fast, the charge, all of those different things.
That is, you've brought in a book just so I can see how thick it is. So they had to memorise all of these calls, and then all the soldiers had to know what they mean as well. That's a lot of.
That's right.
That's huge.
And so the enemy would have certainly wanted to have taken out the bugler first, because he would have been the first person to relay those messages. So if there was that confusion on the battlefield, then so traditionally the bugler was that person.
So much respect for the bugler. Now that's obviously changed over time, as you've said, with technology.
Yeah.
So what's the role now? When you were serving, how did you get into the army? You obviously had experience and background in playing the trumpet, I suppose.
I did. I came from a Salvation Army brass band background. and then went through university as a classical trumpet player and symphonic and orchestral musician. And as a result, it was always one of those things that as trumpet players, many of your brass band and listeners and trumpet players, students, etc., would have all played the last post. And we know, everyone knows how the last post goes.
We certainly do. Let's talk about that, because from my limited knowledge, I'm aware that the bugle doesn't have valves. That must be incredibly difficult to play. And when you're playing such an evocative piece and there is deathly silence, how do you do that without just falling to pieces? Because I cry every time I'm standing in the crowd, and I'm not alone when I'm crying.
Look, it's one of those things. I've had to remove myself from that emotion. And as we spoke off air, it's something that I can't maintain any eye contact with anyone, whether that be around the grave site for funerals or even in large crowds, because you can get overcome with that emotion if you see other people showing that emotion. So I guess years of experience have just taught me to get on with the job and do the best that I can.
You've done the Nobbies dawn service for years and years. You retired last year, but you were also beamed right across Australia. You've been on the Nine Network. I mean, you've done some pretty amazing big crowds.
Yeah, look, it's and again, it's something, I guess, because it's pitch black and it's very dark and emotive on those mornings of the dawn service. One of those mornings was at the War Memorial on the parapet, beamed right around Australia on the Nine Network, on the Today Show, around the radio network on ABC, and in front of about 30,000 people.
Oh, that is just absolutely amazing. Well, look, can you play us a little piece today?
So what I'm going to play is what's called the charge, and this would have been the commencement of a battle or a particular charge. And at the end of this particular bugle call, the infantry or the soldiers would have been moved. So the call would be made and the commander would have gone, charge!
Okay, all right, let's do it. Here we go.
Charge!
Wow, there you go. Well, Graeme, thank you for coming in today and imparting some of your knowledge. There's just so much we could talk about, but we just really appreciate you coming in today.
Look, it's been a delight to share some of these experiences with you, Sarah, and your listeners.
Now, you can't do the Bugle Boy for us.
No. Have you got it?
No, just wondering. I don't know how much the bugle actually features in that. Thank you very much. And, of course, this will be up on our website as well. Appreciate your time and everything you've done for our country, the service you've done.
2NURFM, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.